We're going to look at an anesthetic with Desflurane. With Desflurane, we're going to start with an 8-liter fresh gas flow and the vaporizer set to 9%. This is something like what the package insert suggests in using Desflurane at a time after the airway is secured. We're going to use a low and slow rise in inspired concentration, and we're going to do that by setting the vaporizer first to around 3%. And let's look at the graph at the same time as we look at the picture. We now have the GasMan picture on the left and the GasMan graph on the right. We're going to use the vaporizer set to exactly 3%, which we will achieve this way, and begin the simulation. Inspired is rising, expired is rising, and here we see the time. We have now spent 5 minutes, during which, with this low vaporizer setting, the inspired concentration has risen slowly over time. I'm going to return to the beginning and start again. Now we'll give a real anesthetic with Desflurane. We have the fresh gas flow set to 8 liters per minute and the vaporizer set to 3%. And every few breaths at the beginning of this anesthetic, we are going to raise the vaporizer setting and continue the simulation, and raise the vaporizer setting and continue the simulation. And we see that at the end of 5 minutes, inspired has reached 6%, expired 4.4, and the vessel-rich group 2.6. Let's expand our view of this simulation and continue to increase the vaporizer setting every few breaths. And we see that alveolar, the dark green bar and the dark green curve, have crossed the MAC level at approximately 7 minutes of anesthesia, and the vessel-rich group at this point, the red line, has just reached 1 MAC, the dotted line. This is an excellent time for us to turn down the vaporizer, and we'll set it to exactly 8%, and watch how the anesthetic proceeds from here. We've now stabilized this level in the vessel-rich group at approximately 1 MAC. We've now given a 15-minute anesthetic with the anesthetic rising to 1 MAC. Let us look and see that we have delivered 43.7 milliliters of anesthetic, and the patient has taken up 2.8 milliliters of anesthetic. This doesn't look very efficient, and we better find a better way to reach this 1 MAC level. Let's see how we can do it. Let's first save this anesthetic, Command S, and save this as Des. And now let's do another simulation, again of Desflurane. I'm going to hit Command N or click the new anesthetic button. Again, I'm going to choose Desflurane for this anesthetic in a semi-closed circuit, 60 times real time for speed and a 70 kilogram patient, as I did before. And this anesthetic we're going to give as an efficient anesthetic at low fresh gas flow, so we're going to color it green, as this is a green administration of the drug. We know from a moment ago that once we put the graph out here, that we're going to want to look at a 15-minute anesthetic. So we'll set the view to 15 minutes right from the beginning. And this time, rather than starting with a high fresh gas flow and a low vaporizer setting, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to use a very low but convenient fresh gas flow of 1 liter per minute and a very high vaporizer setting of 18%. Now, 18% should never be administered to the patient, but administering 18% to the breathing circuit will get the inspired to rise slowly because we have been careful in choosing our low fresh gas flow. Let us now hit the run button and see what happens. We see inspired rising, and we see expired rising. And I'm going to pause briefly when alveolar, or expired, has just reached this 1 MAC level of the dotted line. I'm going to let this anesthetic proceed for a few moments longer, at which point I'm going to realize that the vessel-rich group is just getting to that 1 MAC level, as we see in the picture and in the graph. At this point, I shall turn down my vaporizer to 9%, and leave the fresh gas flow exactly where it was set before at 1 liter per minute. I'm going to continue this anesthetic and let it stop by itself at the end of 15 minutes. Let's take a look at the anesthetic use in this particular case. Before, as you recall, and I shall click on the other end, so that we can see before we got 2.87 milliliters of uptake into the patient's body, and here 2.64, almost identical quantities into the patient. But notice in the first case we used 43.7 milliliters delivered from the vaporizer versus 10.38 milliliters. A very, very big difference. And in fact, if we look at this in dollars, we see that it's $5.50 versus $23.50. Let us now invoke the overlay capability of GasMan to overlay these two simulations. First, I'm going to name this green one file. I'm going to name this Frugal. And now we shall overlay these two graphs. So in the first case, we raised up the delivered concentration from 3% to 5% to 7% to 9%, and we went up slowly. In the second green anesthetic, we started with the vaporizer set to 18% and continued until, quote, the right time. If we look at the breathing circuit, we'll notice that in each case, the concentration in the breathing circuit, which is the patient's inspired concentration, rose smoothly and gently towards approximately the same level. If we look at the alveolar level, which is typically manifest by our end tidal concentration, we see that they have both reached their proper point at about the same 10 minutes, and the vessel-rich group has anesthetized almost identically for these two different anesthetics. The only real difference between these two anesthetics is the cost. And we can see what those costs were. $23.7 and $5.3. Let's close this for a moment and look at those numbers and recognize that we have given two anesthetics that were actually identical from the patient's standpoint, but very, very different insofar as their cost is concerned.